Hello everyone and welcome once again to a comprehensive history of the Yu-Gi-Oh! TCG. It has been a long journey, but we are finally here. The series finale, 2014, the end, and the beginning. 2014 would start differently to other years, as Konami would change their tournament policy on Forbidden Unlimited list updates. Going forward, list changes would occur several times a year instead of just twice in March and September. In Forbidden we would see 6 cents get its inevitable ban, Self-Destruct Button Go for being an unhealthy card, Return from the Different Dimension for also being degenerate, and for some reason, Dragon Machine. It's one thing to hit the Dragon Ruler deck, but to completely kill Dragonity as a strategy was perhaps a bit heavy-handed. In Limited we would see every adult Dragon Ruler go to 1, Magician of Faith would be unbanned, the Bree Dragon would drop to 1, the Fine Wind of Mist Valley would go on the list, as would Final Countdown, Sacred Sword of 7 Stars, and Spellbook of Fate. In Semi-Limited we would see Chaos Sorcerer and Lone Fire Blossom both drop from 1 to 2. Finally there would be Unlimits to Fire Formation Tenki, Archlord Christia, Constella M7, Tour Guide from the Underworld, Masuki, Plaguespreader Zombie, and TG Striker. This new list would go into effect immediately, with YCS Sydney, Australia being run by Anders Cole's Karakuri deck. This deck would utilise a Psychic engine alongside Instant Fusion to push Synchro plays. Adding these techs to the already fast Karakuri engine made for a very swift aggro deck. At the end of January we would see the release of our first booster set, Legacy of the Valiant. This would be the strongest set release since Lord of the Tachyon Galaxy last year, with the Xseed monsters doing some heavy lifting. First we have number 101, Silent Honor Arc, a rank 4 water monster with 2100 attack and 1000 defense. Requires 2 level 4 monsters. You can detach 2 materials from this card, then target 1 special summoned monster your opponent controls in face up attack position. Attach it to this card as material. You can only use this effect of number 101, Silent Honor Arc, once per turn. If this face-up card on the field would be destroyed by battle or card effect, you can detach 1 material from this card. This was the first time we'd see this type of removal in the game, making it perhaps the best form of removal at all. Ghost Trick Dullahan was a rank 1 Dark Fiend monster with 1000 attack and 0 defense, required 2 level 1 monsters. This card gains 200 attack for each Ghost Trick card you control. Once per turn, you can detach 1 material from this card, then target 1 face-up monster on the field, half its attack, until the end of this turn. If this card is sent to the graveyard, you can target 1 other Ghost Trick card in your graveyard, add that target to your hand. Much like Ghost Trick Alucard, Dullahan was another nice bit of Xseed toolboxing. The decks that could run it absolutely would, just because it was a way to get over most of your opponent's strong monsters. Fujinte Tsukiyomi was a light Beast Warrior rank 4 monster with 1800 attack and 2300 defense, required 2 level 4 light monsters. Once per turn, you can detach 1 material from this card, send your entire hand to the graveyard, minimum 1, and if you do, draw 2 cards. When this card you controlled while face up leaves the field because of an opponent's card effect, you can target level 4 Beast Warrior Bujin monsters in your graveyard up to the number of Xseed materials this card on the field. Special summon those targets. You can only control 1 Fujinte Tsukiyomi. Its effect to draw 2 cards meant it saw play in all kinds of strategies that utilised light monsters. Standard Magician is a dark rank 4 spellcaster monster with 2100 attack and 200 defense. Requires 2 level 4 spellcaster monsters. During your main phase 2, you can also Xseed summon this card by using a rank 3 or lower Xseed monster you control as material. Transfer its materials to this card. This card gains 200 attack for each material attached to it. If this card attacks a defense position monster, inflict piercing battle damage. If this card battles, after damage calculation, detach 1 material from this card. Standard Magician functioned very similarly to Gaia Knight the Thunder Charger. Though of course by that point we'd seen how strong Gaia Knight was, so they put the main phase 2 restriction on its summon. Evil Swarm Exciton Knight is a rank 4 light fiend monster with 1900 attack and 0 defense. Requires 2 level 4 monsters. Once per chain, during your main phase or your opponent's battle phase, if your opponent has more total cards in their hand and field than you do, you can detach 1 material from this card, destroy all other cards on the field. Also, your opponent takes no further damage this turn. I'm going to go out on a limb and say this was the best Xseed monster in this set, and one of the best Xseed monsters in the game. It had taken a while, but Xseeds finally got their Black Rose Dragon. Unsurprisingly, this would be the biggest chase card in the entire set. Moving on from the Xseeds, we also have the quick play spell, Shared Ride. For the rest of this turn, each time a card or cards is added from the main deck or graveyard to your opponent's hand, except by drawing them, you immediately draw one card. You can only activate one Shared Ride per turn. It's not quite max C, but it's pretty close, and it would see a lot of side decking play over the next decade. Ghost Trick Jack Frost is a Dark Fiend level 1 monster with 800 attack and 100 defense. Cannot be normal summoned unless you control a Ghost Trick monster. Once per turn, you can change this card to face down defense position. When an opponent's monster declares a direct attack, you can change that opponent's monster to face down defense position, and if you do, special summon this card from your hand in face down defense position. Yeah, it's pretty good. Has some of that Book of Moon utility, but in the form of a hand trap. Around the same time of Legacy of the Valiant, we would see a new manga promo card in the form of number 47 Nightmare Shark, and the release of the Cyber Dragon Revolution structure deck. This structure deck would give a much needed boost to the Cyber Dragon strategy, thanks in part to two cards. Cyber Dragon Core is a light machine level 2 monster with 400 attack and 1500 defense. This card's name becomes Cyber Dragon while it is on the field or in the graveyard. If this card is normal summoned, add one Cyber, spell or trap from your deck to your hand. If only your opponent controls a monster, you can banish this card from your graveyard, special summon one Cyber Dragon from your deck. You can only use one Cyber Dragon Core effect per turn, and only once that turn. This card is exactly what the deck needed. It isn't enough to have Cyber Dragon in the hand anymore. You needed it faster, especially if you wanted to play into their new Xseed monster, Cyber Dragon Nova. Cyber Repair Plant is a normal spell with the following effect. If a monster named Cyber Dragon is in your graveyard, you can activate one of these effects. If you have 3 or more Cyber Dragon in your graveyard at this card's activation, you can activate both effects and resolve in sequence. You can only activate one Cyber Repair Plant per turn. Add one Light Machine monster from your deck to your hand. Target one Light Machine monster in your graveyard. Shuffle that target into the deck. To clarify, the Cyber Dragon in quotes doesn't just apply to Cyber Dragon itself. Upon the release of this structure deck, almost every Cyber Dragon support monster going forward would have the effect where its name becomes Cyber Dragon while on field or in the graveyard. Like Core, this was another much needed consistency boost to the deck. Following Legacy of the Valiant, we would see its Xseed monsters get immediate play in tournament winning deck lists. YCS Berlin would be run by Mermail, with Alpay Engin dropping Deep Sea Diva entirely to focus on an Xseed engine. Silent Honor Arc would be the star of this build, as its detach could trigger Atlantean Dragoons. Around the same time, Christian Georges would win YCS Atlanta with Fire Fist. This list too would focus on taking advantage of the new rank 4 monsters. February 2014 would be a month dominated by Mermail and Fire Fist builds. This period has retroactively come to be known as Fire Water format. Next up in March, we would see YCS Chicago be run by Tom Mack's Bujin list. With Fire Formation Tenki back at 3, Bujin was more or less at full power and was able to take the tournament. Interestingly, Tom Mack opted not to run Bujinte Tsukiyomi in this build. And that is understandable, because this deck wasn't lacking in card advantage or consistency. Next we would see YCS Sao Paulo Brazil be run by Carlos Freitas and his Harpy deck. Harpies had been a contender for a while, and it was nice to see them finally get a YCS. The release of Channeler and Hysteric Sign in Lord of the Tachyon Galaxy had been the game changers, but of course they released during Dragon Ruler format, so we're only seeing the deck top now. Channeler being able to summon any Harpy from the deck, alongside Hysteric Sign searching Elegant Egotist, made it very easy for this deck to spam out its rank 4s. Thanks to the Wind typing and Beast Warrior attribute, it was also able to make use of Xseed monsters like Ice Beast Seroframe and Lightning Chidori, cards that other decks simply couldn't use. In April we would see the second update to the Forbidden Limited list this year. Morphing Jar and Morphing Jar number 2 would be forbidden. In Limited we would see hits to the Fire and Water strategies, with Coach Soldier Wolfbark and Mermail Abyss Skund going to 1 each. Rekindling would also be hit alongside Infernity Barrier. In Semi-Limited we would see Necroface and Erratic Seal of Convocation go to 2. Magical Stone Excavation and Primal Seed would be unlimited. Following this list, we would see Rise CS Las Vegas be taken by Danny Yu's Hieratic Rulers deck. Following the limiting of all 4 rulers, the strategy would splinter off into a bunch of different builds. You had Hieratic Rulers, then there was Blue Eyes Rulers, and then there was Mythic Rulers. There was a lot of choice if you wanted to play a Dragon Ruler strategy. With Dragon Raffine gone, and all 4 rulers at 1, a new approach was needed. The Hieratic engine had proved to be successful when the rulers were at 3, and once again they showed to still be capable now. April 26 would see the release of one of the most impactful side sets we'd seen in a good while. Dragons of Legend was a booster pack focused on the Orichalcos arc from the original Yu-Gi-Oh! Anime, but it would also include support for a bunch of modern decks. So let's go through these cards, shall we, from least to most ridiculous. First is the counter trap, Wiretap. When a trap is activated, negate the activation, and if you do, shuffle that card into the deck. Blackwing, Steam the Cloak. A Dark Wing Beast level 3 tuner monster with 800 attack and 1200 defense. If this face-up card leaves the field, special summon 1 Steam Token. If this card summoned this way is used as a synchro material, all other synchro materials must be Blackwing monsters. It's a nice little addition to the Blackwing deck, another tuner for them to use that has nice little recovery utility. That said, it was not Blackwings that this card would be most infamous in, but that's a story for more modern times. Firehand is a level 4 Fire Pyro monster with 1600 attack and 1000 defense. When this card in your possession is destroyed by your opponent's card and sent to your graveyard, you can target one monster they control, destroy that target. Then, you can special summon 1 Ice Hand from your deck. Ice Hand is a level 4 Water Aqua monster with 1400 attack and 1600 defense. When this card in your possession is destroyed by your opponent's card and sent to the graveyard, you can target 1 spell trap they control. Destroy that target. Then, you can special summon 1 Fire Hand from your deck. As you can see, these cards came in a pair, each fetched each other when destroyed, and they had recurring utility. It was very much the same effect as Reborn Tengu, just power crept. Mathematician is a level 3 Earth Spellcaster type monster with 1500 attack and 500 defense. When this card is normal summoned, you can send 1 level 4 or lower monster from your deck to the graveyard. When this card is destroyed by battle and sent to the graveyard, you can draw 1 card. Another simple but powerful effect. Being able to tutor monsters to the graveyard is always welcome. Being able to draw a card on battle restriction was also a nice bonus. Finally, we have the spell card, Soul Charge. Target any number of monsters in your graveyard, special summon them, and if you do, you lose 1000 life points for each monster special summoned by this effect. You cannot conduct your battle phase the turn you activate this card. You can only activate 1 Soul Charge per turn. This card is absolutely insane. Why does this exist? It should have never been printed. What were they thinking? This card is just way too one-sided. People do not consider life points as a cost. In terms of card advantage, it's a +4, if not more. It's way too strong going first. Should have never been made. Dragons of Legend would quickly be followed up by a new main set, Primal Origin. Primal Origin would be quite the game changer, as it introduced a new archetype that would change how he played the game. The artifacts would be a new archetype focusing on monsters that could be set in the spell and trap zone. If they were destroyed while inside the spell and trap zone, they would then be special summoned to your field and gain additional effects. The introduction of this archetype would lead to new trap heavy formats, as players would have to think twice before using removal cards such as Evil Swarm Exciton Knight. Artifact Moraltech is a light fairy level 5 monster with 2100 attack and 1400 defense. You can set this card from your hand to your spell and trap zone as a spell. During your opponent's turn, if this set card in the spell and trap zone is destroyed and sent to your graveyard, special summon it. If this card is special summoned during your opponent's turn, you can destroy 1 face-up card your opponent controls. As you can see, artifacts were taking a new approach to the control strategies, ones that did the majority of the gameplay on the opponent's turn. It was a unique gimmick, but one which had now set a precedent that could change the game in the future. Artifact Scythe is a light fairy level 5 monster with 2200 attack and 900 defense. You can set this card from your hand to your spell and trap zone as a spell. During your opponent's turn, if this set card in the spell and trap zone is destroyed and sent to your graveyard, special summon it. If this card is special summoned during your opponent's turn, your opponent cannot special summon monsters from the extra deck for the rest of this turn. As you can see now, Konami were not messing around when they made this archetype. These were serious disruptive effects that could end your turn immediately. You're probably thinking, well, they need to be summoned or destroyed during the opponent's turn. How consistent is that really? Well, Konami thought the same. Artifact Sanctum is a normal trap that reads, special summon 1 artifact monster from your deck. If this card in its owner's possession is destroyed by an opponent's card, you can target 1 card on the field, destroy that target. You can only activate 1 Artifact Sanctum per turn. You cannot conduct your battle phase the turn you activate this effect. So yeah, if you thought not playing destruction cards made you safe on artifacts, think again. Sanctum would bring them out anyway. And if you dared use removal cards, be prepared to have Sanctum punish you for that also. Moving on, we would see new support for several other archetypes. Traptrix Dionea was a Earth level 4 plant monster with 1700 attack and 1100 defense. Unaffected by the effects of Hull normal traps. When this card is normal summoned, you can target 1 Traptrix monster in your graveyard, special summon that target in the fence position. When this card is special summoned, you can target 1 Hull normal trap in your graveyard, set that target, but banish it during the end phase of your next turn if it is still on the field. You can only use this effect of Traptrix Dionea once per turn. This would be the card the deck absolutely needed. Cards like Traptrix Momelo needed to be special summoned to get the most out of their effects, and it was a level 4 deck, meaning that there was potential there for a rank 4 engine. A solid addition to the Traptrix strategy. Mecha Phantom Beast O-Line is a level 2 Wind Machine Tuner monster with 600 attack and 1000 defense. While you control a token, this card cannot be destroyed by battleable card effects. If this card is sent to the graveyard, you can special summon 1 level 3 Mecha Phantom Beast token. You can only use this effect of Mecha Phantom Beast O-Lion once per turn. You can banish this card from your graveyard. Immediately after this effect resolves, normal summon 1 Mecha Phantom Beast monster from your hand. The Mecha Phantom Beast archetype is in this weird spot where it's not very good as a dedicated deck, but it has so many cards that are amazing for utility in other decks. Think of Dracosac, think of O-Lion, and there are several other cards in the archetype that this applies to. O-Lion would be a welcome piece of synchro support if nothing else. Madolche Anchelli is a level 4 Earth Fairy monster with 1000 attack and defense. You can tribute this card, special summon 1 Madolche monster from your deck, and if you do, it cannot be destroyed by battle, but shuffle it into the deck during the end phase of your next turn. You can only use this effect of Madolche Anchelli once per turn. If this card in your possession is destroyed by your opponent's card and sent to your graveyard, shuffle this card into the deck. It goes without saying, but if any archetype gets its own dedicated Lonefire Blossom, you should just max out on it immediately, because it is by default the best card in the entire deck. Majesty's Fiend is a level 6 Light Fiend monster with 2400 attack and 1000 defense. Cannot be special summoned. Neither play can activate monster effects. That's just swell. Number 42, Galaxy Tomahawk. This rank 7 Wind Machine Exceed monster has 0 attack and 3000 defense. Requires 2 level 7 monsters. Once per turn, you can detach 2 Exceed materials from this card. Special summon as many Battle Eagle tokens, Machine, Wind, level 6 2000 attack 0 defense as possible. Destroy them during the end phase of this turn. Also, your opponent takes no further battle damage this turn. This card is quite restriction heavy, and it's not very good at the moment. I don't want to drop too many spoilers for the future, but this card is currently banned and has been for a number of years. And the card releases wouldn't stop coming. June would see the release of the Nintendo 3DS game, Yu-Gi-Oh! Sexal World Duel Carnival. The promos weren't outstanding, but they were beginning of what is now known as the Train deck. Then on the following day, we would see the release of the Realm of Light Structure deck. With the Structure deck would come 2 new Lightsworn monsters. Raiden, Hand of the Lightsworn, is a level 4 Light Warrior Tuner monster with 1700 attack and 1000 defense. During your main phase, you can send the top 2 cards of your deck to the graveyard. Then, if any Lightsworn monsters were sent to the graveyard by this effect, this card gains 200 attack until the end of your opponent's turn. You can only use this effect of Raiden, Hand of the Lightsworn, once per turn. Once per turn, during your end phase, send the top 2 cards of your deck to the graveyard. So not only did Lightsworn now have their own dedicated named tuner, but it could also mill cards before the end phase, speeding up the deck significantly. Goes without saying, this would become a staple in the strategy. And what good's a tuner without a synchro? Michael, the Arch Lightsworn, is a level 7 Light Dragon Synchro monster with 2600 attack and 2000 defense. Requires 1 tuner plus 1 or more non-tuner light monsters. Once per turn, you can pay 1000 life points, then target 1 card on the field, banish that target. When this card is destroyed, you can target any number of other Lightsworn monsters in your graveyard, shuffle them into the deck, and if you do, you gain 300 life points for each returned card. Once per turn, during your end phase, send the top 3 cards of your deck to the graveyard. Being able to banish cards on command was just the cherry on top. With these 2 new cards, Lightsworns became viable contenders again. Finally, we have July 10th, 2014, a day that would change the game forever, but not immediately impact it in the way people were expecting. Superstarter Space-Time Showdown was the first set in the game to include the newly introduced Pendulum Summoning mechanic. So what is Pendulum Summoning? Well, trust me, that was a question many people were asking, and it is a question still asked now, as it is a complicated mechanic that many people initially struggle with. I remember when this mechanic first got introduced to the game, and there were all sorts of ruling mistakes being made, simply because we found it so confusing. We will not be viewing any Pendulum deck lists in this video, but I will still try my best to explain this mechanic. So Pendulum monsters have the distinction of being 2 card types at the same time. They are both a monster and a spell card, and each have a spell and monster effect accordingly. The top text box is their spell card effect, whilst the regular text box is their monster effect. Accompanying the spell text box are 2 numbers. These numbers are the card's pendulum scales. To accommodate this new mechanic, the Yu-Gi-Oh! Playfield had to change shape entirely. On the far left and right end of your field were pendulum zones. These zones were where you played your pendulum monsters as spell cards. Once you had the pendulum monsters played in your pendulum zones, you could begin pendulum summoning. What was a pendulum summoning? Well, let me bring your attention back to the numbers on the spell effect. These numbers are your pendulum scale. As we can see with the 2 pendulum monsters here, Stargazer Magician has a pendulum scale of 1, and Timegazer Magician has a pendulum scale of 8. When Stargazer and Timegazer Magician are in the pendulum zone, their pendulum scale is 1 to 8. This means you can special summon from your hand or face up extra deck any number of monsters whose levels range between 2 and 7. Therefore, hypothetically, if your hand contains nothing but monsters whose levels are 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 or 7, you can summon all of them simultaneously as one summon. Now you're probably asking, what do you mean by face up in the extra deck? Well, pendulum monsters are also unique in what happens to them when they're destroyed. When a pendulum monster is destroyed, either as a monster or as a spell card, they do not go to the graveyard. Instead, they are put on top of your extra deck, facing upwards. Therefore, if you want to perform a pendulum summon, and you have face up pendulum monsters in your extra deck, you can summon those monsters to your monster card zone instead of using monsters in your hand. It doesn't have to be a choice either. If you really wanted to, you could summon monsters from both the extra deck and hand at the same time. Now you're probably thinking that sounds convoluted and overpowered, and in truth, it was. It absolutely was. Not immediately, but give it a few years and pendulum decks would come to completely dominate the game. But that's not the story we're telling today. I'm just simply trying to explain this mechanic for you, and it is not an easy mechanic to explain. What is easily understandable, however, is the spell card Supply Squad. This continuous spell card had the effect where, once per turn, if a monster you control is destroyed by battle or card effect, draw 1 card. Another piece of basic simple card advantage generation. You can't go wrong with that. So the starter deck had introduced pendulum monsters and changed the game, but it would still be a while before they had any relevancy to the game itself. For now, let us go back to focusing on what really matters. The North American WCQ would be run by Corey McDuffell's Hat deck in July 2014. Hat would be an acronym short for Hand Artifacts Trap Tricks. This deck would utilise all 3 as an engine. As we established previously, Fire and Ice Hand would go back and forth continuously as card advantage. The Trap Tricks engine allowed you to set up your back row, and the artifacts would blend with your back row to make your opponent too scared to do anything about it. These three archetypes had such good synergy and such a basic and easy to understand game plan that they would become the popular deck of the format. Coming along in July was another Forbidden Unlimited list update, the third one this year. No cards would be banned this time, but Goyo Guardian and Gear would be moved to limited. Formula Synchron, Magician of Faith and Reinforcement the Army would be in semi-limited, and finally Mirror Force and Dimensional Prison would be unlimited entirely. Some of these list changes would come up during World Season, such as Gear, whilst others wouldn't, as Goyo Guardian was still banned in the OCG. Hand Artifacts Trap Tricks would continue to be one of the dominant decks going into World Season, but it would not be alone and would have many contenders going against it, with the likes of Infernity, Bujin and Gear also going for the crown. The 2014 World Championship would be hosted in Italy on August 9th to August 10th. First place would be taken by Canadian player Shahabi Keradine. Canada won a World Championships before the United States could. This would be a very diverse World Championship with 5 decks taking the top 8 spots. Of those 5 decks, Infernity would be one of the popular contenders that year. Keradine would be playing with a combo heavy build that utilised Letharval Chain and Soul Charge to their max potential. Infinity's always had the problem that it could brick, but this was a more consistent version of the engine. In the side deck we can see 3 copies of Spiritualism. This was a unique piece of back row removal, as it had the effect where it could target one spell or trap card the opponent controlled and return it to their hand. The effect of Spiritualism cannot be negated. This means that Keradine would be hitting those artifact cards with 0 risk. Once Spiritualism was in play, there was no way for the opponent to stop it. The deck itself is a treat and something to be seen. It's been a while, but let's have a look at the opening Infernity combo. So as you can see, there was quite a lot you could do with an opening hand, and that was just in the hands of a first timer. Experienced players could go even further, ending with the full Infernity trap lineup and a board full of monsters. The deck could be linear once the combo got going, but the number of ways to get there was varied, with the rank 3 monster, Levier the Sea Dragon, allowing you to loop your banished Archfiends and Street Patrols. If there was ever a deck that could be described as fun to play as and infuriating to play against, it would be Exceed Infernity. Placing in the runner-up spot would be Japanese player Hiyama Shunsuke. The World Championship would be the last big hurrah for the Hands Artifact Trap Tricks deck. In this build, the hands were missing entirely, making it purely an Artifact Trap Tricks build. Shunsuke had chosen his cards well, with Kaiku the Ghost Destroyer being a vital side against Infernity and Bujin. As we can see, there was a lot of variety in this World Championship. 3rd and 4th place would be taken by Infernity and Kaiser Colosseum Bujin. Further down we can see representation by Gear and Machina Gadgets. The 2014 World Championship would be the true swan song of the Sexal era. All things considered, it went out in a pretty good place. This World Championship would be the last time we would see Yu-Gi-Oh! Played as the game we know and love. From here on out, it would be a new type of Yu-Gi-Oh! A faster Yu-Gi-Oh! A more explosive and combo heavy Yu-Gi-Oh! This would not be a better or worse Yu-Gi-Oh! It would simply be a different game. Many would enjoy these changes, while others would be left longing. When it comes to the question of classic Yu-Gi-Oh versus modern Yu-Gi-Oh, there is no right or wrong answer. It is simply a matter of preference. And with that, let us go into the first set of the new modern Yu-Gi-Oh era, the set that changed the game like none ever had before it. That set was Duelist Alliance. Duelist Alliance would release on August 14th, 2014, and would be the first main set to feature Pendulum monsters. Despite that, there were hardly any Pendulum monsters of note in this set. Instead, every card of note was a type we were already accustomed to. Strap yourself in, because we have a good 20 or so cards to examine. First, we'll start off by featuring the new warrior archetype in Duelist Alliance, Stellar Knight. We begin with Stellar Knight Altair. This level 4 light warrior monster has 1700 attack and 1300 defense. If this card is summoned, you can target one Stellar Knight monster in your graveyard, except Stellar Knight Altair. Special summon that monster in defense position. Also, monsters you control cannot attack for the rest of this turn, except Stellar Knight monsters. You can only use this effect of Stellar Knight Altair once per turn. Stellar Knight Deneb. This light level 4 warrior monster has 1500 attack and 1000 defense. If this card is summoned, you can add one Stellar Knight monster from your deck to your hand. Except Stellar Knight Deneb, you can only use this effect of Stellar Knight Deneb once per turn. Stellar Knight de Tauros. This rank 4 light warrior monster has 2500 attack and 2100 defense. Requires 3 level 4 monsters. While this card has Exceed material, your opponent cannot activate cards or effects when you normal or special summon monsters. Once per turn, you can detach one Exceed material from this card, then target one card on the field, destroy it. If this card is sent from the field to the graveyard, you can special summon one Stellar Knight monster from your hand or deck. Stellar Nova Alpha is a counter trap card that reads, when a spell/trap card or monster effect is activated, send one face-up Stellar Knight monster you control to the graveyard, negate the activation, and if you do, destroy that card, then draw one card. Many other Stellar Knight monsters would feature in Duelist Alliance, but these are the main ones. So far, the archetype isn't too big of departure from what we were already used to. Del Tauros has a cute protection effect, but that's after you've already made your main plays, meaning this deck is made for the long game. Still, had Stellar Knights featured in the Sexalt era, they would have seen a lot of play, and they would still see a fair bit of play going forward from the Duelist Alliance. Next up we have Castel, the Sky Blaster Musketeer. This rank 4 Wind Winged Beast monster has 2000 attack and 1500 defense, requires 2 level 4 monsters. You can detach one material from this card, then target one face-up monster on the field, change it to face-down defense position. You can detach 2 materials from this card, and target one other face-up card on the field, shuffle it into the deck. You can only use one Castel, the Sky Blaster Musketeer effects per turn, and only once per turn. It goes without saying at this point, but rank 4 players have always been eating good, and this is just another card for that banquet. Next we have the level 8 Wind Winged Beast monster, Riser the Mega Monarch, with 2800 attack and 1000 defense. You can tribute summon this card by tributing one tribute summoned monster. If this card is tribute summoned, target one card on the field and one card in either graveyard. Also, if this card was tribute summoned by tributing a wind monster, you can target an additional card on the field. Place the first target on the top of the deck in any order. Also, after that, return the additional target, if any, to the hand. This was just the latest addition to the Mega Monarch series that Konami had slowly been releasing. Monarchs had never really gone away, but they weren't seeing competitive play anymore. At least not until the debut of this next card anyway. The Monarch Stormforth is a quick play spell that reads, once during this turn, if you would tribute a monster for a tribute summon, you can tribute one monster your opponent controls even though you do not control it. You can only activate one, the Monarch Stormforth, per turn. During the turn you activate this card, you cannot special summon monsters from the extra deck. Stormforth would completely power creep Soul Exchange, a card that had released in the original Yugi and Kaiba structure decks. Obviously retaining your battle phase was a big positive over Soul Exchange, but what really mattered was the quick play effect. Combined with existing cards like Escalation of the Monarchs, it was possible to make tribute summons on your opponent's turn, meaning the Monarch deck now had legitimate forms of disruption. It would still be a while before Monarchs could challenge as a top tier meta contender again, but this card was a big push in that direction. Time-Space Trap Hole would be the latest addition to the whole trap card archetype, technically making it Trap Trick support. When your opponent special summons a Monsters from the hand or extra deck, shuffle that Monsters into the deck. Then, you lose 1000 life points for each returned monster. This card released in a pretty timely manner, and you would be forgiving for thinking that it was in response to Pendulums, which in all fairness, it probably was. Destroying Pendulums with Hold cards would send them to the extra deck. Bouncing Hold cards to the deck, however, got rid of them entirely until they were drawn again. Next up is Artifact Lancia. This light level 5 fairy monster has 1700 attack and 2300 defense. Like all artifacts, it can be set in the spell and trap card zone. Also, like all artifacts, if it's destroyed in the spell trap zone during the opponent's turn, you can special summon it to your field. During your opponent's turn, you can tribute this card from your hand or face-up field. Neither player can banish cards for the rest of this turn. This card was intended as artifact support, but unlike other artifacts, you could use its effect directly from the hand. For this reason, it saw more play as a hand trap than it ever did as a part of the artifact engine. Fearless, Lightswarm Archer, is a light level 4 Beast Warrior Tuner monster with 1100 attack and 2000 defense. Cannot be normal summoned or set, must be special summoned by a card effect. If this card is sent from your deck to the graveyard by a monster effect, special summon it. You can tribute this card, and target one monster your opponent controls, destroy that target, then send the top 3 cards of your deck to the graveyard. Wolf had always been an essential part of the Lightsworn engine, and now it had a tuner to accompany it. Goes without saying, but this went perfectly well with the newly introduced Lightsworn structure deck support. Next we have something completely new, and I don't just mean new as an archetype, I mean completely unseen to the game. The first, worm-type monsters, the Yan Xings. By this point in the game's life, it was getting a bit difficult to create new dragon support. Every time a new piece of dragon support was introduced, or a new dragon archetype made, it would directly interact with the already existing dragon engines, meaning that dragons never went away. This severely handicapped Konami's ability to design new decks. As a result, they would find a workaround in creating a completely new card typing. So let's just have a choice look at a few of them. Chi Ren, Light of Yang Xing, is a level 1 light worm tuner monster with 0 attack and 0 defense. When this card you control is destroyed by battle or card effect and sent to your graveyard, you can special summon one Yang Xing monster from your deck, except Chi Ren. When a Yang Xing monsters you control is destroyed by battle or card effect and sent to the graveyard, while this card is in your graveyard, you can special summon this card, and if you do, banish it when it leaves the field. You can only use one Chi Ren effect per turn, and only once that turn. Bian, Earth of the Yang Xing, is a level 3 Earthworm monster with 1600 attack and 0 defense. When this card you control is destroyed by battle or card effect and sent to the graveyard, you can special summon one Yang Xing monster from your deck in defense position, except Bian. You can only use this effect of Bian once per turn. Once per turn, during your opponent's main phase or battle phase, you can, immediately after this effect resolves, synchro summon one synchro monster using only Yang Xing monsters you control. A synchro monster that used this card as a synchro material cannot be destroyed by battle. Baxia, Brightness of the Yang Xing. This level 8 light worm synchro monster had 2300 attack and 2600 defense. One tuner, plus 1 plus non-tuner worm monsters. See, they've changed how they write synchros now. When this card is synchro summoned, you can target cards on the field up to the number with different original attributes of the worm monsters used for the synchro summon of this card. Shuffle them into the deck. Once per turn, you can target one card you control and one level 4 or lower monster in your graveyard, destroy that card on the field, and if you do, special summon the other monster from the graveyard. But as you can see, the Yang Xings were a synchro focused archetype, and they all shared a similar characteristic. When they were destroyed, they flowed into something else. As we saw with Fire and Ice Hand, that can be a powerful thing to build a deck around. In the case of Yang Xings, the entire worm archetype was restricted solely to them, making it much easier to balance than if these had been dragon monsters. But as we're about to see, this characteristic of floating on destruction wasn't just isolated to the Yang Xing archetype. Going forward, it would be something of a standardized characteristic of Yu-Gi-Oh card design, and we can see this in the biggest and most supported archetype in the entire Duelist Alliance, the Shadows. The Shadows are a series of dark monsters that act as corrupted counterparts of pre-existing dual terminal monsters. Starting with Shadow Falco, a dark puppeteered version of Gusto Falco. Falco is a Dark level 2 spellcaster flip tuner monster with 600 attack and 1400 defense. Flip, you can target one Shadow monster in your graveyard except Shadow Falco. Special summon it in face down defense position. If this card is sent to the graveyard by a card effect, you can special summon it in face down defense position. You can only use one Shadow Falco effect per turn, and only once that turn. So immediately we're faced with something of a challenge. If you attack into this card, it will flip and get its effect. But if you try and remove it from the field with destruction or sending, it will trigger its second effect in the graveyard. So that's a bother. You're going to have to rely on banishing, bouncing or spinning. There's no way around it. Shadow Hedgehog is a Dark level 3 spellcaster flip effect monster with 800 attack and 200 defense. Flip, you can add one Shadow spell/trap from your deck to your hand. If this card is sent to the graveyard by a card effect, you can add one Shadow monster from your deck to your hand, except Shadow Hedgehog. You can only use one Shadow Hedgehog effect per turn, and only once that turn. Shadow's Grandmaster is a Dark level 4 spellcaster flip monster with 1800 attack and 1000 defense. Flip, you can target one monster on the field, destroy it. If this card is sent to the graveyard by a card effect, you can send one Shadow card from your deck to the graveyard, except Shadow's Grandmaster. You can only use one Shadow's Grandmaster effect per turn, and only once that turn. Shadow Dragon, a Dark level 4 spellcaster flip monster with 1900 attack and 0 defense. Flip, you can target one card your opponent controls, return it to their hand. If this card is sent to the graveyard by a card effect, you can target one spell/trap on the field, destroy it. You can only use one Shadow effect per turn, and only once that turn. Shadow Beast is a Dark level 5 spellcaster flip monster with 2200 attack and 1700 defense. Flip, you can draw 2 cards, then discard 1 card. If this card is sent to the graveyard by a card effect, you can draw 1 card. You can only use one Shadow Beast effect per turn, and only once that turn. So just going by these 5 main deck monsters alone, you can tell we're working with something deadly. No matter what you try to do, your opponent is almost guaranteed to generate more card advantage if they're playing Shadows. These 5 cards alone completely kill hand artifacts trap tricks as a dedicated deck. Those decks were built on card advantage through destruction. This deck is built on gaining card advantage when your cards are destroyed, and it isn't just interaction from your opponent that can trigger these effects. In the case of Shadow Beast, that effect to discard 1 card from your hand can trigger the effect of other Shadow monsters just because they were sent to the graveyard. The same rule also applies if you use these cards for a Synchro summon, send them as effect cost for an Exceed monster, or use them as a fusion material, which is funny, as Shadows are actually a fusion deck. Shadow Fusion allows you to fusion summon 1 Shadow Fusion monster from your extra deck, using monsters from your hand or field as fusion material. If your opponent controls a monster that was special summoned from the extra deck, you can also use monsters in your deck as fusion material. You can only activate 1 Shadow Fusion per turn. Wow, what do you even say to that? Like, we've already established that sending cards from the deck to the grave is an incredibly powerful effect. It's the reason why Future Fusion was banned in the first place, yet here's a new archetype with a card dedicated to doing just that. With such a strong main deck and engine, surely the fusion monsters can't also be all-powerful and game-changing like this. El Shadow Winder is a Dark level 5 spellcaster fusion monster with 2200 attack and 800 defense. Requires 1 Shadow monster and 1 Dark monster, making it viable for Super Polymerization. Must first be fusion summoned. Cannot be destroyed by an opponent's card effects. Each player can only special summon monsters once per turn while this card is face up on the field. If this card is sent to the graveyard, you can target 1 Shadow spell trap in your graveyard, add it to your hand. This card could have been split into 2 monsters, and they both would have seen play, either as an indestructible beat stick or as a lone floodgate. Looking back, that they put both of them on one body just blows my mind. 9 years later, and this card is still an active threat today that sees play in and out of formats. Konami were on some gas when they made this, man. But that's not all. We still haven't even gotten to the archetype's boss monster. El Shadow Construct is a level 8 light fairy fusion monster with 2800 attack and 2500 defense. It requires 1 Shadow monster plus 1 light monster. Must first be fusion summoned. If this card is special summoned, you can send one Shadow card from your deck to the graveyard. At the start of the damage step, if this card battles a special summoned monster, destroy that monster. If this card is sent to the graveyard, you can target one Shadow spell trap in your graveyard, add it to the hand. Window was made to prevent your opponents from building the house. Ironically, Construct was made to tear the house down. The combination of sending a Shadow monster directly from deck upon summon, and then having the battle destruction effect on top, meant that there was very few ways your opponent's board was going to last once this thing hit the field. Suffice to say, this would be the most dominant strategy we had seen since Dragon Rulers. And yet it wasn't alone, there was one other challenger in Duelist Alliance that could stand up to it. Except, not quite yet, it wasn't ready. As of Duelist Alliance, the deck was only half complete. It still needed a bit more support. And that deck would be the Burning Abyss. Skarm, Mel Branch of the Burning Abyss, is a level 3 Dark Fiend monster with 800 attack and 2000 defense. If you control a monster that is not a Burning Abyss monster, destroy this card. You can only use one of these effects of Skarm, Mel Branch of the Burning Abyss, per turn, and only once that turn. If you control no spell or trap cards, you can special summon this card from your hand. During the end phase, if this card is in the graveyard because it was sent there this turn, you can add one level 3 Dark Fiend type monster from your deck to your hand, except Skarm, Mel Branch of the Burning Abyss. Funny little card. At first you're reading it and thinking, this card is useless, but then you get to the second half of the effect and it all begins to make sense. They had us in the first half, I'm not gonna lie. Seer, Mel Branch of the Burning Abyss, is a level 3 Dark Fiend monster with 1600 attack and 1200 defense. If you control a monster that is not a Burning Abyss monster, destroy this card. You can only use one of these effects of Seer, Mel Branch of the Burning Abyss, per turn, and only once that turn. If you control no spell or trap cards, you can special summon this card from your hand. If this card is sent to the graveyard, you can target one Burning Abyss monster in your graveyard, except Seer, Mel Branch of the Burning Abyss, special summon it. Graph, Mel Branch of the Burning Abyss. If you control a monster that is not a Burning Abyss monster, destroy this card. You can only use one of these effects of Graph, Mel Branch of the Burning Abyss, per turn, and only once that turn. If you control no spell or trap cards, you can special summon this card from your hand. If this card is sent to the graveyard, you can special summon one Burning Abyss monster from your deck, except Graph, Mel Branch of the Burning Abyss. Now the archetype's beginning to make a little more sense. Next we have the archetype's Exceed monster, Dante, Traveller of the Burning Abyss. This rank 3 light warrior monster has 1000 attack and 2500 defense. 2 level 3 monsters. Once per turn, you can detach one material from this card and choose a number from 1 to 3. Then send that many cards from the top of your deck to the graveyard. Until the end of this turn, this card gains 500 attack for each card sent to the graveyard this way. If this card attacks, it is changed to the defense position at the end of the battle phase. If this card is sent to the graveyard, you can target one Burning Abyss card in your graveyard, except this card, add it to your hand. So the idea of Burning Abyss is pretty simple. You need to have a good level 3 engine in your deck to summon Dante. Then, you need to get Skarm, Seer, and Graph in your graveyard, so you can use their special summon effects to flood the field and get your engine going. As deck strategies go, this is a bit more complicated, and a bit harder to grasp at first glance, but once you play around with it, it begins to make sense. So with that, we have the Skeleton of the Burning Abyss, a then semi-playable deck that could go, but it wasn't fully cooked yet. It still needed time in the oven. Unsurprisingly, the cards introduced in the Duelist Alliance would be so overwhelmingly strong compared to what came before that they would completely run wild on tournaments. In September, we would see YCS Madrid be topped entirely by Shadows with one lone Burning Abyss in the top 8. That same month, we would also see a Duelist Alliance clean sweep at YCS Toronto, as Shadows would take 6 of the top 8 spots and Stellar Knight taking the final 2. It was a completely new era of Yu-Gi-Oh! And there was simply no going back at this point. Konami had released too many cards, and they wouldn't be able to reverse these changes without essentially banning everything, and we all knew that wasn't going to happen. And if anything else reflected this changing of times, it would be the October 2014 Forbidden Unlimited list. Magician of Faith, Formula Synchron, Coach Soldier Wolfbark, and Reinforcement of the Army would all be unlimited. Gauze the Emissary of Darkness, Blackwing Gale the Whirlwind, Ceasefire, and the Transgrimation Prophecy would be semi-limited. Blow Up Bulb, Infernity Archfiend, Soul Charge and Super Poly would all move down to limited, whilst Raigeki would be unbanned. This ban list is significant because it shows a shift in what is considered a powerful card now. Magician of Faith, Formula Synchron and Wolfbark aren't even worth considering for the list anymore. Gauze and Gale the Whirlwind are no longer the powerhouses they were, and Raigeki is seen as such a non-issue that they unbanned it altogether. Even back in 2014, the idea of Raigeki coming off the list felt unthinkable for many players. But looking back now, this was inevitable. The floodgates had been opened, and all of a sudden many of the cards on the ban list weren't considered too powerful anymore. And with that, we have come to the end of our story. In those 12 years we saw Yu-Gi-Oh! Constantly evolve, adapt and change to the times. From the early Duel Monsters Nostalgia Fest, to the GX transition, to the 5D's Extra Deck revolution, Yu-Gi-Oh! Has always been a growing card game, and with no set rotation, things always need to continue to change for it to stay fresh, at least in the eyes of the creators. From here on out, however, it would be a completely different game. It would be a new Yu-Gi-Oh! A modern Yu-Gi-Oh! A Yu-Gi-Oh! That would require players to hone on a different skill set, and learn to play the game in ways which were unseen before. As we saw with the Duelist Alliance, the card complexity had increased significantly. And this is a comprehensive history of the Yu-Gi-Oh! TCG, not a complicated one. This series may not be covering the modern day, but that's fine, because you see, the history of modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Is also the history of Yugi-tubing. Every big Yu-Gi-Oh! YouTube channel that we see today got their start around this time. The content of their channels covers the history of the modern game as it happened. Everything is documented. There is no better way to get historical perspective now than to look at these old videos from the 2010s. And it's a good thing it was documented as well, because after 2014, the speed of the game's evolution increased significantly, with landmark decks and cards hitting at a rate unlike anything we'd seen before. Between 2002 and 2014, it was a fairly simple task to identify different periods in the game's life, from Critter and Android format, to Chaos and Goat, Airblade to Talidad, Edison to Plant, Dino Rabbit to Windup, and so on. After 2014 we would see Shadows, Burning Abyss, Creef Forts, Necros, Cosmo, Monarchs, PK, Pepe, Metal Foes, ABC, Sudiac and so on. So much was happening in such a short amount of time. For those who invest in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! And are able to commit to it, they will find a very deep, rewarding and skill-intensive game. But be warned, it is not the Yu-Gi-Oh! You have come to know through this series. It is a different beast entirely. Not one that is necessarily better or worse, but one that appeals to a different taste. And if that taste suits you, then be ready to gorge yourself until you can eat no more. So with that all said, thank you so much everyone for watching. This has been a comprehensive history of the Yu-Gi-Oh! TCG. See ya.